Okay. So today's session is basically a panel discussion, which is being organized for the gLOCAL Evaluation Week. This is being organized by the Evaluation Community of India and EvalYouth India together. The panel discussion is on using data for communities use. The agenda for today is as you can see, I'm giving the welcome address and setting the ground rules. Then we would have I would introduce our moderator for the day. That is Umesh Jadhav. He is the co-leader of EvalYouth India. He would introduce our speakers, our panelists, Dr. Mitali Sethi, and Anshika Katara, and Mr. Kalyan Tangsale. Panelists will then speak and introduce important case studies, basically of how they have used data at the community level in their work, in their field of work. We would then have our moderator ask questions to the panel, and then there would be a Q. Then we would open up the forum for Q&A with the audience, and finally we will have the summary and the vote of thanks. So the moderator for the session today is it actually takes me great pleasure to introduce the moderator for the session, because I've been introduced to this community by him and by another colleague, the EvalYouth Community of India, and it's been associated with 1 year, and he is the co-leader and co-founder of EvalYouth India. He is currently an IIC fellow at the University of Chicago Trusts, and he's been in the public policy space for quite a long time now, and he has a technical background. He's also graduated. He's also a graduate of the founding batch of the Indian School of Public Policy, and I now hand over it to him for introducing our panelists for the day. Umesh, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayush, and I take this opportunity to welcome all the esteemed panelists and all the audience for the day. As we all know, data is the new oil, and in the business, technology, and commercial world, because of the interest, innovative ways of using data for profits and for their interest has been established. However, in community development and in general in sustainable development, data and evidence has its own importance. Evidence-based decision making helps maximum utilization of resources, and in general improves the governance and welfare of all the society. What we have today is a discussion with an experienced panel of speakers who has used data in their individual works, and it gives me an immense pleasure to introduce to you the diverse panel. We have representation from government, non-profit, and CSR and international agencies. So this is a great panel. With great pleasure, I want to introduce the first speaker for the event. Dr. Mitali Sethi. Dr. Sethi is an IS officer of Maharashtra cadre, and she's currently, wait a minute. I'm so sorry. There is some technical lag. Yatin, I'm pausing the screen. Can you share screen? There is some technical, yeah. Sorry for the glitch.
Is the right slide visible?
Yeah, this slide is visible. Thank you so much. So as I was saying, Dr. Sethi is an IS officer of Maharashtra cadre. She's currently working as Zilla Parishad CEO in Chandrapur. She was earlier she was subdivisional magistrate and project officer at ITDP in Dhani and Amravati, where her commendable work in the COVID-19 vaccination has got a national recognition. Dr. Sethi is an orthodontist by training, and it gives me pleasure to also introduce her as a friend and as a fellow change maker in our Nirman community. We also have with us today is next slide, Yatin. We also have today is a young change maker, Miss Anshika Katara. She is she's a program manager at Head Held High, but also is a co-founder um, at a new young organization, Kayanta, who is working in development and sustainable development with her co-founders. Anshika has worked with NGO in M&E domain, and she holds PG diploma from ISDM. And the third speaker for today is Mr. Kalyan Tangsale. Kalyan works with Swiss Aid India as a tribal livelihoods officer. He is also founder of Pranali Initiatives. Kalyan is a proud recipient of Srishti Mitra Award by Government of India, and he holds Masters in Technology from Sita IIT Bombay. Kalyan is also a friend and a mentor to a lot of young change makers like me. So gives me immense pleasure to welcome this panel on the board. And what we will do is we'll start with Mitali, and in the same order, we will listen to each of these young leaders, their story, their introduction, and how they use data in their respective works. So thank you so much, and over to you, Dr. Mitali.
Hi, thank you, Umesh. So could you just give me one line on what do you expect in the 10 minutes that I'll be speaking on?
Yeah, so
And if you
Mitali,
could
yeah,
also give me permission to share my screen.
yeah, sure, sure. So Mitali, the session is highlighting the kind of use, how we can use data in our in mostly use of data for benefit of communities and welfare of communities in general, and how in your respective works, what are some of the case studies and cases where you could bring the use of evidence in effectively solving a problem or tackling a challenge?
So I'll just I have 10 minutes. So I'll just probably share what I have felt in the limited um, career and the limited experiences I've had on the field, and in the 5 years that I've been on the field. Um, the one thing is that it's very different for an NGO or um, uh, an organization that sort of works in a limited number of villages or in a limited number of space. For the government in general, the scale is much higher. We cannot really choose and say that we are going to work in these 10 villages or these 20 villages based on XYZ criteria. So the scale is always 100%. And I think as an officer, that's been my largest challenge, that how do I come to a place and then look at my scale. So when I was SDM in Melghat, I had around 420 villages to handle, uh, a population of around 2.5 lakhs. And just in a year's time, now that I'm COZP, I have around 1500 villages, and I have around 20 lakhs people, 20 lakh people, um, for whom I have to design various developmental initiatives. And to design various developmental initiatives, it's important for me to first understand what are their problems. And then of course, when you're working in rural sector, the population is so scattered that the contexts of everybody in various different areas are extremely different. So now I just wanted to use two case studies of what we were doing. And of course, in Chandrapur, we have started doing a lot of stuff. I mean, actually, if I start talking about data, it would take me probably at least 2 hours to tell you exactly everything that we are doing. But there are just two, 3 points that I want to make whenever somebody plans on working with the government, or in that capacity and at that scale. So the one thing is to always understand that who are our stakeholders and how do we bring them at one platform. So one of the things that we had done uh, when I was in Melghat was understanding that who are our development partners. And our development partners in Melghat, for example, in most of the tribal areas, there are a lot of non-governmental organizations that are working. And we started a platform called Trialogue Melghat, where we called everybody who was working in that area. It was not only NGOs, it could be civil service organizations, there were small bodies that were coming to work with us. And we had a lot of response, a lot of people coming in telling us that we are working in this particular area and we are working on this sector, and then we are working on that area. So we took up a project, in fact, with Sitara in IIT Bombay, and there was one student who did her MTech working on the collaboration between NGO and governments. And so we mapped where, in which village, which NGO is working, how many villages have how many NGOs, which sector has NGOs and which sector does not have NGOs. Now, one might ask that, why are you doing this exercise at all? I mean, what is the output of this exercise, or what was the outcome of doing something like that? So one outcome for me was to understand that there were particular villages where lot of NGOs were concentrated, and then there were particular villages where there were no NGOs. And I needed NGOs to be there in a particular village, because for whatever reason, I mean, maybe the village was interior, maybe some development indicator was off. And what it the whole process helped me to understand, to approach an organization and tell them that would you be open to working in this village. And I think most of the organizations were also quite open, because they also wanted to uh, do some change, effect some change on the field, where they could also say that we are working and helping administration in everything that they're doing. And so we sort of mapped this in Tableau also, and then we created a village wise template. And every village knew that which organization is working in our village, who is working in this organization, and this is their phone number. So anytime an Anganwadi worker needs help or an Asha worker needs help, then they could reach out to these people. So that's the first thing. The second thing, like Yatin told me that I had written an article for India Development Review, and he wanted me to speak about what was it that I was talking about there. So in nutrition, I think the biggest thing when working at the government level is to understand which pockets have internet, which pockets don't have internet. Are we making heavy systems? Are we making light systems? If we are making heavy systems, then what are the most important indicators? And I think, to me, the biggest question since I've started working is data contextualization, and understanding that the state, of course, needs data for its own use. But when I am sitting in a particular district, I don't need to understand why the state is asking whatever data it is asking. I will have one specific problem, and answering the why for my district and understanding why I'm doing what I am doing is the most important question for me at any point of time. So sometimes what the state is doing is enough for me, and I can cull data out of what the state has done. At other points of time, I cannot. And I'll give you a small example, but something that people don't know. And when I tell them, they're suddenly like, oh my God. I mean, if you look at CAS, if you look at the Reproductive Child Health Portal, if you look at HMIS in the health department today, if you look at the UDICE portal in education today, all of our field workers enter data. The data goes to the state, but they are not able to look at their own data themselves, and that's a big problem. Because when my ANM or my ASHA or my headmaster is entering data somewhere, I need to see the analytics for my district. I don't want to go to every school and download a PDF of what is their infrastructure issue. What I want is to see that, if there are no toilets, then where do I need toilets? And if there are no kitchen sheds, then where is it that I need kitchen sheds, so that I can immediately make that policy decision and say that, I have money and this is where there is demand, and so I should do that. What actually happens is there is so much money in the government system. So money is never the problem, but you don't know where to invest that money because you don't have local data. So one of the things we did last month in Chandrapur, for example, was that we designed a Kobo form, and we said that, we're just going to ask 10-15 questions. And a great thing about gathering local data is it breaks the hierarchy between people. So a BDO might be telling you something, but then you're asking the headmaster, who is the guardian of his particular institution, his or her institution. And I'm saying that, you tell me if you have a functional toilet or not. You tell me if your kitchen shed has a problem. And the most important part of doing that, of course, is designing what questions do you want to ask them so that you get meaningful data out of it. And last month, when we ran this exercise, when I asked my BOs, how many toilets do you need, they said 0. In my analysis, I found 19 schools which did not have either a male toilet or a female toilet, and I found 250 schools where one gender toilet was not there. Anyway, so that's just a big problem with, how we are collecting data in today's time. The second thing I just wanted to show you was how we did the nutrition thing, the IDR article that I wrote. So what we did basically was CAS was not working for us because it was too data intensive. It was a very heavy application, and in Melghat there are a lot of data devoid pockets. So then we designed an Excel system, and we said that, you have to give us data of just 10 indicators, and we would monitor only those 10 indicators. And so this is how we used to take the data, what is in front of you, and we used to have percentages where we used to have measuring efficiency, and we used to say that, we are not only looking at SAM MAM, but we are also looking at underweight, and we are also looking at stunting, and we are sort of understanding nutrition in a holistic manner. The last thing that I want to mention is that because we were looking at data that way, and because we were looking at local data, and because we were analyzing our own patterns, we were able to one day just ask the question that, in an entire year, when is it that SAM peaks? I mean, when is it that children are most malnourished in an entire year? And because we asked that question, we got to know that, acha, there's April and May where children are just peaking in terms of malnutrition. And we had no idea why, because I was constantly told that it's either diarrhea or it's hypothermia when children should be dying. And therefore, the peak should have come in a monsoon season or in winters, which was not the data in front of me. And when we mapped it, this was the graph that we got, and this was absolutely surprising. We were like, what is happening? There's no idea. And I thought probably there's something wrong with the data. And then we went on to another year. So we looked at 19, we looked at 20, we looked at 21, and all 3 years had the same kind of graph. And that led to an understanding that actually there was a lot of migration happening in October and November, after which a lot of people were coming back in March and April. And because people were not getting services all these 6 months of not being here in Melghat, it was difficult for them to, be properly nourished when children come back. And that led us to design a small migration tracking system, which was taken up at the state last year. And we piloted in 6 districts last year. I was part of the state migration committee. And this year we are launching migration tracking system in the entire state. And in the entire country, I think Maharashtra is the one state that is actually working on an institutional system to understand how much impact migration can actually have on developmental indicators. So I think I'll just stop here. My point is to basically say that, to understand what is the scale at which we are working, to understand data contextualization, and to also tell your field workers why is it that we are collecting so much data. I mean, I have field workers after field workers who fill data every day without knowing why are they filling this data, and they're not able to really see the purpose of doing what they're doing. And some of them are so brilliant that when I tell them the purpose of doing something, they do it with so much heart and joy and with so much accuracy, which really helps me after a point of time. So I would just stop here because I think I finished my 10 minutes, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Mitali. So what we'll do is we'll first listen from all the speakers and then we'll ask audience a few questions. I think in all the cases that you showed us in nutrition, SAM, education, I think the kind of initiatives you and your team has taken has showed us the ways of how to effectively use data for governance model. So with this, we'll move to our next speaker. I invite Anshika to um, give her. Anshika, over to you. And if you need any slides to share, you can share the slide.
Anshika, you are on mute.
Oops, so sorry. Thank you so much, Umesh, and thank you, Matani. It was great listening to you and understanding how the data can be used by the states. I'm of the same opinion. Data collection is definitely a very huge exercise, and as an NGO, when you actually go to go to villages, your field team need to be really aware of why they need to collect certain data, and you also need to. So one thing which as an NGO we have realized is we need to also ask the field team what kind of once they do a basic primary survey, what kind of informations they are getting in which is not being captured, and if they think it's very important, it's important to capture them. And how can they easily capture the information, because a lot of places there is a issue with the network, there is issue with them filling the information, because that might take time. So we try and train them in different technology, how they can collect the data offline and give us the authentic data. I just to give an example of a case study which we did was recently about the students and their accessibility of internet. How much internet do they have, and for what do they consume? Because we wanted to bring these students to the platform and help them to get digital internship. But when we started surveying, we realized that most of these students, they do have, even if they have internet connectivity, it is of very poor quality, or they have very small packs which is just used for their own online classes, and then they cannot probably go and do internships which would require them to use the data for like meet for 2-3 hours. And that's why a lot of students who even used to come on board and be initially very excited to take up digital internships would say would drop in between. And we had this we would not understand, because they would really be very excited, be trained, and they were doing it initially very well but started dropping in between. That's when we realized the problems which they were facing, the timings when they had the electricity connections, the and the and electricity, they would not have electricity during the evening timings. Then the data which and the data also gave us the information that the students did not really have the internet pack would get expired like by 6 in the evening, so then they could not recharge it. So all that could just be highlighted because we were able to have the data in front of us. So that's very important when you're doing the surveys, when you're interacting with people. It's very important to understand what are their pain points. The grassroots level of data collections gives us that idea. So that's what I would like to say about the apologies, I'm slightly unwell. So that's one case study which I would like to just point about the data collection.
Okay, thank you so much, Anshika. With with the government and the NGO side covered, I think now we'll move to communities. How can how can we use data with community? And I hand over the virtual mic to Kalyan. Over to you, Kalyan.
Thank you. Thank you, Umesh. Thank you, EvalYouth India and Koi. Also the co-panelists, Dr. Patali and Anshika. Thank you very much for having me here. Since both my co-panelists have actually talked about the grassroots realities and have given us some insight from the one side view, I would like to take a bird's eye perspective, and look at the ecosystem at large and explore the question that was given to me initially. Can participatory approaches really help improve use of data by communities at the grassroots? So let me take a quick overview of the ecosystem or of the backdrop on which we are asking this question to start with. If we look at the appetite for use of data is certainly increasing in the country, as we all know. Same is the case of digital governance. Appetite for digital governance is increasing. Appetite for use of evidence for making decisions and designing policies is increasing. Appetite for use of technology for data generation, data collection, data analysis, data visualization is also rapidly increasing. And the development in the space of monitoring, evaluation, planning, data analytics in India, particularly in development sector, is happening mostly from the top-down approach. The central agencies are taking lead, for example, like DNEO at NITI Aayog and other institutions at the central level, and then state governments are following the frameworks prescribed at the national level, and so in that manner the systems are being developed in a top-down way. Certainly there are some initiatives even at the grassroots where people are trying to collect data, both qualitative as well as quantitative, and use it for making decisions, for informing communities. But the pace of that development is not very impressive at the moment. I mean, making data collection or making monitoring, evaluation, learning, participatory exercise by involving or by keeping community at the center. So that development is not, the pace is not really matching. I also feel when we look at the development overall, we are currently overwhelmed with developing data strategies, creating systems, creating technologies so that we can gather data, we can analyze that data, and somehow we can project, visualize that data so that we can use it for our learning and decision making. So we are all overwhelmed with developing those frameworks and technology based and systems. And that's why, maybe because of it's an overwhelming exercise, we haven't been able to provide a lot of attention towards the purpose of doing all of this, making communities capable of taking local action, right, facilitating decisions, and right from the bottom up approach, bottom up manner. So that is happening in a very limited sense, I feel. Secondly, the alignment, I'm not able to see the alignment. I have had opportunity to work on the both the sides for some time, and I've been part of teams who are developing systems at the grassroots as well as at the higher levels. And what I've realized is there is a lack of alignment between the two sides of development. Let me give you a small example. When civil engineers they construct a tunnel, they actually locate two laser beams at equal height from the mean sea level from both the sides of the mountain, right? So that when they create a hole around, ideally these both beams should collide with each other and become one when the hole is created, when the tunnel is created. If there is a misalignment of even 1 degree in aligning these two laser beams, what happens is the tunnel eventually gets lost. I mean, these two ends never meet, and both the tunnel they get lost in the mountain. The tunnel is never created. I think something like that is happening. I mean, we are creating frameworks at the higher level, we are developing certain approaches at the lower level, and thrust is that the data, for example, in case of SDG localization, right, the thrust is that the data should be generated granularly at the grassroots, and then it should be used for policy making and decision making up at the higher level. But that alignment is somehow missing, and that's why data. I worry if data will be useful even for the administrators and policymakers at the higher level. So that's the backdrop. And then on this backdrop, you're asking questions: can participatory approach really be useful for improving use of data by the communities, by the villagers at the grassroots? And that gives rise to 5 questions mainly. 3 questions that skeptics ask and 2 questions that practitioners ask. The first 3 questions are, do participatory approaches really hold any water in 2022? The second question is, are participatory approaches are even relevant today? Right? Do they have rigor? Do they, what is about question of validity? What is about question of use? Can participatory approaches really compete or even complement, the thrust of granularized, quantitative, measurable data, which can be, analyzed using computer systems, projected and used for decision making? Can quick and dirty mechanisms used in participatory approaches be, even really compete or at least be complementary to the data systems at large? Third question is it really the idea whose time has come? I mean, should we really make an investment in the participatory approaches at all? Because participation is supposed to have its own cost. And that because of these 3 questions, the skepticism about participatory methods is more. It's not trusted equally, as the quantitative methods are. And that's why, the question of community using data, the qualitative data in a participatory way to improving their own decision making, I think is a far-fetched the reality. It's going to take a lot of time. It's still not on the radar because there is a lot of skepticism. The questions that the practitioners ask is, okay, I'm interested, but what are the methods and which methods can I really use? And why participatory approaches are not widely used? Why we are still, at the experimental level in an anecdotal way? Why our, use of participatory methods is so limited? Is it even scalable? Are the questions that people ask. Robert Chambers had asked this question. So if we look at the development at large, in 80s, participatory methods were in experimental stage. In last decade, participatory methods have actually got momentum. If you look at number of incidences where participatory approaches were used for monitoring, evaluation, learning, and even planning, it's increasing. So for example, in case of in Indian context, after the 14th Finance Commission, made it mandatory, the participatory planning through GPDP was mandated. I mean, we are, still a long way to go before, it actually becomes a real practice and a usable practice. At currently, it's, I would say, at a stage of tokenism at best, where civil society organizations and reform-oriented administrators are taking lead. The GPDP plans are really good, but otherwise it's mostly tokenism, I would say, at this stage. But it will take its own time and course to that practice to foster. But it has got some momentum at least in last 10-15 years. So in 2016, Roberts asked this question, whether the participatory approach or participatory method, participatory learning is the idea whose time has come. I think in Indian context, it's not yet, because we are still developing data strategies and systems. We are not really emphasizing so much on learning, at least, in a participatory way, in a collaborative way, together with the communities. I mean, communities, as Dr. Mitali said, the ground functionaries are not using data. They don't have access to data. They're not using the data. They're not using data to learn. Forget about the communities. I mean, communities don't know how to read data. Communities don't know how to use data. It's not a Gram Sabha is sitting and, using data or its analytics and then making informed decisions. So I think that is because we the practitioners, policymakers, administrators are currently overwhelmed with developing data strategies, frameworks, and systems. We are not emphasizing so much on learning part. And because need for learning or need for creating learning mechanisms is not felt so much at the moment, we are not yet there. So I don't think the time for using participatory methods to improve use of data for communities learning has arrived yet. There is some time, but the time will come very soon. The time will come very soon, because the next agenda after we have developed framework, strategies, and systems, the next agenda is how do we improve learning. Right? That's what is happening in Australia. That's what is happening in European countries. Right. I feel after 10, 15, 20 years time, we will be talking about, how to improve community learning using data. And why we are discussing it today, because, this is the time when some of us should take lead and develop some demonstrative models, develop some examples, which then can be synthesized and used for creating systems, learning systems, I would say, that, we can scale up at the national level. Now let's take about quickly take the two questions that practitioners ask. Do we have participatory methods, and what methods can we use at the community level? And now I'm speaking from practitioners' point of view, who can over next 10 years time demonstrate some models of improving participatory learning. So one conventional approach that we all know is participatory rural appraisal or rapid rural appraisal. Or now, people even talk about participatory statistics, participatory numbers. Number of books on participatory statistics is now increasing. So I think those are the three approaches which are conventionally used and pretty familiar to most of us, and can, be inspiration for the next level of methods. But I would like to, also talk to you about what is called citizen-centric approaches. So for example, in urban spaces where PRA is not very relevant, the researchers and monitoring evaluation practitioners, particularly from Australian region, they are coming with systems called, citizen assemblies and improved versions of public consultations. A lot of innovation happening around citizen assemblies, and those techniques can be used. Then the whole new school developed by Europeans of participatory action learning, participatory action research, or what Danny Burns called participatory systems research or systemic action research. So those schools, I feel, there's a lot of hope and potential in those approaches and methods. So more than focusing on PRA, we should focus on PAL, participatory action learning, participatory action research, and systemic action research. Those methodologies would be very, very useful. Then use of creative media, use of body, use of word, use of visuals, use of games and sports, and use of even rituals would be very useful in conducting monitoring evaluations, doing planning, and even rituals can create a lot of data. We have never thought of using rituals as a medium of data collection. So how do we use it? So those creative methods, and of course the technology for collaboration, which is a topic, a different topic for discussion altogether. Regarding the question, why participatory approaches are not widely used as yet, I feel there are three challenges. As I said, the time has not yet come when we will have more appetite for learning from our data that we are currently struggling to collect and analyze. I think that will give us more momentum. Secondly,
Yes,
yeah, okay. So I'll stop here and would be happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so what we'll do, thank you so much, Kalyan. What we'll do is we have 10 minutes for audience questions, and I request all the audience to type in their questions, precise pointed questions to each of the panelists in the chat box. We'll take them FCFS, first come, first serve. We have curated some question for panelists, and I will, it is open for all the three panelists to check in. As Dr. Mitali shared, that a lot of frontline community workers also don't get access to data, and they generally don't know what is the purpose for using the data. I feel similarly, communities are only giving a lot of their personal data for the use of either government or NGOs program, but their participation is only limited to being giving data. Their participation either in interpreting the findings of their data with their local context, or in the decision making based on this evidence that is generated data is limited. So my question is how we can involve communities in the in this entire process, and right from, say, and I'm deliberately saying this not only in decision making but because also in interpreting the findings to the context. So every specific geography and communities have their own individual. So to you, Dr. Mitali, and to Kalyan, anyone can answer.
So I just want to set the record straight and say that when I say that, field workers do not have data, or that community does not have access to data, it does not mean that nothing is happening. I mean, multiple things are happening on the field. A lot of our field workers have already devised ways and methods of how to use data in their local contexts. And it might not fit very neatly into the theory of when people talk uh, big terms about statistics and participatory action learning and all of that. That does not mean that community is not using data already. I mean, I have real life examples of villages where people have used participatory learning, are already using participatory learning. Look at Narega. I mean, everything that happens in Narega comes from the Gram Sabha. And yes, probably your planning is not at that level where every Gram Sabha is planning and understanding what are they doing. But there are a lot of Gram Sabhas who have now started doing fairies, and they've started writing that Narega, this is what happens with Narega, and this is so one has to understand where do you need to plug the gap, and why is the gap happening, and why is it that people are not able to plan well. So one of the things that, for example, Kalyan was mentioned, and Kalyan, I'm so sorry, I kept thinking I've seen him somewhere since yesterday, and now when I just saw you, I opened my WhatsApp and I was like, oh my god, I met him. I'm so sorry, I finally remembered you. So what he was mentioning is that uh, we are not ready yet, or people have not been using participatory. I think one of the big reasons for that was because we did not have infrastructure. I mean, there were resource constraints, there were internet constraints, and the scale of saying that so many people need to come together and do participatory planning is a very utopic thought if you start thinking about it. Because how do you know people are not doing participatory learning? What do we know? How do you know, sitting in Bombay or Pune or Chicago, if you are in Chicago, that people are not doing participatory learning? It's only sitting at the field and meeting with people that you will come to know what are people doing. It's possible that that data might be decentralized but is not getting centralized enough for us to know that participatory learning is happening. So everybody at every point is just doing random sampling, and random sampling is not generalizable, right? So you can get a view of this is not happening and this is. I think over a period of last 2-3 years, the advances in infrastructure, the advances in internet, and the advances in things like Kobo, for example, and other data collection forms has significantly improved the capability of both administration and the community in understanding how data needs to be planned. So I will have at least 10 to 15 villages who are already models, who will show you that we have used participatory data planning, and I have field workers who have already shown me that this is something that you're telling me now, but I've already found out an answer to this, and maybe this is my answer. You take this and now tell me how do we do it at scale. So that's our job, to understand that how do we take, like Kalyan was mentioning, that we need to um, make a role model and then say that this is what we need to take forward, or this is something that we need to scale. So involving community, again, the question that you asked me, it's a very difficult and a very easy thing, because you have to understand your language. The way you communicate with people is extremely important. When you tell people that you are uneducated and therefore we understand data better than you, you're sending a message that I'm more intelligent than you, and therefore I'm not speaking in your language at all. So when and I feel this whole data understanding is very elite in that sense. We always look at people and a village and a community as something that is different from our very own self, and we have data understanding and they don't. They have data understanding in their own scale, in their own understanding, and if you just tell them the amount of information that they need, they will surprise you so much with things that they will do. So my understanding of using community as a partner in decision making has to always been to follow what Kalyan was mentioning. In fact, my thing has also, for example, we are now doing a 50 villages model village project, and we are saying that, we need to create 50 villages where next year we would say that, these people have done participation, these people have done data and policy making on their own, and this is something that they've come up on their own. So I go to villages and I tell them that this is not my job, I'm going to go after 3 years. So this is your job, and you do something and show to me. And people take that challenge, people come to me, and then those are the people we work with, and then we say that, look, they've done this. And so when they do this, we tell 10 more people and we tell them that, they've done this and you also have to do it. It spreads like wildfire, but you have to start on some level, and you have to start with a lot of humility, compassion and love for the community that you're working with. A lot of judgment and a lot of pre notions of how things are does not work. So I'm just we have to start accepting the jugaad versions of what we are doing, and then say that, this is what works for us, and we will scale it in a limited dimension, see if this works. I mean, Digvijay is here in the meeting, and we worked on MTS, and we know how much of jugaad we have used to a model that has now become a state model. So it's just, we have to learn to experiment with whatever is happening on the field, and then take it and say that, we are not going to learn from only the books, we are going to learn from people. It's a two-way street.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Mitali. Since EvalYouth India is a forum of young professionals who want to work in the M&E and evaluation domain, the question is for the entire panel is, how in your different work settings, how youngsters can contribute, especially with the data collection or analysis skills. The reason we are asking this question is, in lot of EvalYouth India forums, expert speakers have referred that there is lot of energy among youth who are in grad schools and master students at district levels, small towns, and their energy can be utilized in either monitoring government programs, monitoring individual NGOs work. So maybe you can suggest few ways in which the audience or the youth in general can contribute and collaborate with the agencies or the NGOs. This question is open for all the panelists. I request Kalyan to start, and then maybe Dr. Mitali and Anshika can answer the same.
Sorry, Umesh, could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was how youth and young professional with some skill and understanding in data collection and analysis can contribute in the kind of work that all of you do towards a equitable society in general.
Right. So see, I mean, as Dr. Mitali said, there are opportunities. I mean, there have been, there are people who have been doing great work, and one can always be part of those initiatives and trying to contribute to it, learn from it. But I feel, your action should also be informed by the larger context. So I'll talk more about it. And if anyone is particularly interested, please drop me a line. Would be happy to connect you with practitioners who are doing some awesome work. You can always be part of their work and learn from what they're doing and contribute also. The larger context I was talking about, when I say not much is really happening at the moment, or even that I said the time has not yet come for the idea. I mean, community learning using data is yet to come, and time is yet to come. When I said that, I had two things in mind. One is, if we look at whether the community participation in using data for their own learning as a systemic intervention, just like, the rate at which we are, insisting on collecting granularized data, digitizing it, analyzing it, and using it for making decisions, are we equally talking about using participatory methods, quick and dirty data collection, and engagement with community? Yes, of course, as Dr. Mitali said, there have been cases, and particularly the NREGS social auditing has been a great experience, particularly in an Indian context. So social auditing is the 40-year-old concept, and we have extensively used it. So at larger level, to scale up participatory methods, we need to invent models like social auditing, which are relevant for Indian context, which are relevant for Indian, situation. And then we'll have to embed those practices into our program planning, monitoring, and evaluation through some flagship programs like NREGS. It's only when we emphasize on improving practices like social auditing, we will, have arrived there. We'll create spaces for people to have more meaningful participation. So making systemic change towards improving people's participation was my point. And, my experience so far, or observations so far have been that we emphasize more on quantitative data, granularized data, digital data, than on quick and dirty data, people's perceptions, and using people's perception in decision making. How do we combine them? How do we, make them complement each other? And how do we make participatory processes part of our planning, monitoring, evaluation systems at large through some flagship programs to start with? So that's one thing. And, the youth leaders are actually invited to think more about it and invent practices like social auditing or public consultation, citizenship, citizen engagement, citizen assemblies. There are a lot of methods, and you can definitely innovate around it. So that's one thing. Secondly, when it comes to community participation, people are participating, using information to some extent. But let me ask this question here: what is the purpose of using data? Right? Why do we want it? What do we mean by that? What do we mean by use of data? What is the purpose of it? If the purpose is it only deciding what is needed to be done in the village, or is it about mobilizing people? Is it about doing more empowerment, or is it helping individuals to flourish themselves as individuals? Right. So if we take that learning route, right, it's not only then implementing certain project activities. Then the agenda is to enable people's participation for flourishing their own lives and making the whole exercise more reflexive, making it more multi-stakeholder arrangement kind of process. Now, when we talk about participation, it's always ethnic debate comes in, right? We talk about we and they, right? And then how to involve them in the process. But if it is a multi-stakeholder process, it's everyone's space. I mean, we have to create spaces where everyone can come, talk to each other, develop a reflexive mindset, and think about how we could do it better. I think there are two important words in it in this question. One is we, how we could, and then do it better. So how we could do it and could do it better are the two questions. So that requires developing reflexive mindset. So when I was talking about not much is happening in terms of improving participation using data, I was essentially saying that currently we don't have means to use data or spaces to use data or information, both qualitative and quantitative, to improve reflexive practices of all the stakeholders, and we develop processes through which communities or less empowered communities and members of this multi-stakeholder arrangement gain more power. Because when it comes to multi-stakeholder arrangement, there starts the power dynamics, and how do we navigate through power is the question. So we'll have to innovate around it. So my suggestion for the young leaders and young practitioners would be, if you are interested in making systemic changes, try and bring in participatory methods in program planning, monitoring, evaluation, implementation through SCUM flagship programs. If you are a ground level practitioner, find out ways to help people navigate through power and become more reflexive. Yeah, Umesh, I hope I answered the question.
I think Umesh dropped out of the call.
Okay.
Sorry for that. So what we'll do is we'll take up the questions which are in the chat right now.
Yeah.
So I'm going.
Nitin, you want me to read the question?
Yeah, please, Ayush.
So there are a couple of questions from the audience, and they've been sort of put here for who they are. So there's a question for Dr. Mitali that from Alok, that if there is already a lot of administrative data such as Mission Antodaya being collected and reported, data quality and its dissonance with the survey findings, such as NFHS, are quite sharp. How have you tackled this while setting up local data systems?
NFHS is literally my nerve. You've caught on my nerve when you talk about NFHS. Uh, it's very difficult. I mean, if you see the disc, I don't know if you've seen, and I'll take both questions of Alok here. Alok has asked another question to me. Um, so, when you look at your monthly progress reports, I'm not sure if you've looked at nutrition MPRs. The amount of discrepancy you have between NFHS and MPR is mind-boggling. In Amravati district, if you look at the MPR, and forget Amravati, I'm now in Chandrapur, so I'll tell you the amount of wasting NFHS mentions Chandrapur has is 35%, and the amount of wasting I have in my MPR as of today is 0.01%. That's the discrepancy. I have 100 SAM children, and if I was to go by NFHS standard, I would have had at least 10,000 SAM children. So that's the amount of discrepancy that we are talking about. And to my head, it has always this is a question I started asking last year after I saw the data of Melghat, and I was like, how in this whole damn world is this possible? And it was, nobody has ever given me an answer except a secretary of Telangana when I asked her that, if you have the same issue, and she said I have the exact same issue. And she said when she started looking at who was doing an FHS, she sort of realized that IIPS has outsourced it to an agency that was actually blacklisted in Telangana. That was one answer that I've gotten. But from multiple sources, I have gotten to know that IIPS is a very reputable institute, and has proper standards set for the data collection that they're doing. My understanding is, if you look at the difference between MPR, another survey that we had run, and NFHS, the amount of sample is very, very different. I mean, we take 100% of children. They take a very random sample and a very little sample, if you ask me. Uh, Even then, this doesn't make sense. If they are calling wasting what I measure, whatever is wasting in my MPR, if that is wasting in their analysis also, then also it doesn't make any sense. And NFHS, I just feel like if IIPS was doing NFHS, they should have been more transparent about what was the methodology, how was it done, and maybe they could release raw data for us to actually check. It could be done, if not in public domain, at least with the government to sort of cross check. If not child wise, then probably cluster wise. But then, until and unless NFHS releases raw data, you're never going to get an answer to that question. Because even if and again, another problem with NFHS is it's being measured every 5 years or now 3 years, and MPR is being done every month. So even if your methodology is similar, your sampling and your frequency of data is so different. But even with all that, for anybody who has ever studied statistics, it still does not make any common sense on why is this happening. So I'm sorry, I don't have any answers to your question, except that NFHS is also done by a government agency. And I just feel like even if it is third party inspection, it has to start becoming more transparent, more credible. One thing that I can definitely tell you, what I am doing now in Chandrapur, in fact, I planned this today only. Um, what we are doing is, initially, I don't know how many of you understand the nutrition sector that well. So there is stunting and underweight and wasting. And all of this is based on 3 indicators of height, weight, and age. Now, what we've done is, instead of taking abstract data from field workers, we've started collecting raw data ourselves. So we've said that, instead of a CDPO telling us that, you tell us how many SAM and MAM you have, we tell them, you give us height and weight, and we will put it. In fact, Digvijay had created an Excel calculator, and that is where we started. So we are now collecting, we're starting this on 15 June. And we are collecting raw data, and we are saying that there are levels where error can happen. So I want to see from 0.01% up till where can I take my wasting and say that, it aligns at least somewhere with NFHS data. And the problem with it not aligning is that there might be children who are out of the fold of the treatment that we want to give them. So we will now take raw data, and there are three levels of errors that I have identified in my system. The number one error is where your growth monitoring device is faulty. So when you're taking height, you're not taking proper height. When you're taking weight, you're not taking proper weight. The second error is your incentive of your field worker to report or not report a SAM or MAM child. The third level of error is where she looks at a sheet and says that, this is the height and this is the weight, and therefore there is a SAM or a MAM child, which a lot of people do an error. So we've eliminated the number 2 and number 3 error. And the first error of growth monitoring devices, we are now giving new growth monitoring devices to everybody who have, defective GMDs. So that's one example of how, we are now saying that let us measure properly and let us do a third party inspection. So when I say Anganwadi measures the data, I call my ASHA worker and I call my ANM and I say that, check what she's measuring and then do a third party inspection. There is so much that you can do. You can't do more than this when you're on the field. You can say I've repaired my GMDs, I'm collecting raw data, I'm doing a third party inspection. After that point of time, you have to accept the data that's coming in front of you plus minus 10%. Then you can't say that, government people are reporting wrong data and you're saying all that. I feel like we've done corrections at our level. So that's the story of NFHS. And your second question about GPDP and data integration. So the thing is that when I work on the field, I'm not an academic. I used to be an academic and I try integrating academics in what I'm doing. But when I'm looking at a problem, I look at a problem and I say that, okay, this is my problem. This is the solution that I require. So these are XYZ data sets that are in front of me. And so I can overlay data depending on the situation that I require. And that's already happening at many levels. It's not like if you look at, Narega ka MIS and JJM MIS. These are two MIS that are the most beautifully built things I've ever seen. Narega ka data is in public domain, and anybody who analyzes MREGS data, you will get so much information on, how many things are there in public domain. A small example is to start looking at how many disabled people are getting employment under Narega. I have 18,000 people in Chandrapur who are disabled, and only 1,000 of them have job cards. I was looking at the data last week, but that data is in public domain. And if I want to, but until I ask that question, only when I ask a question of how many disabled people are getting employment, would I start looking at social welfare data in Narega and GPDP. In fact, WCD has just taken an overlay of GPDP funds and growth monitoring devices fund that they require, and they're taking the 10% out and they're saying that, this is the analysis we require. So the answer to your question is that we need to build these skills at local levels. And by local level, I mean at least the district level. Everybody has to define their units properly. A village does not have to be a unit for every data analysis. It can be a district where a person is assigned. So in fact, I have Ankita. She's a rural technology fellow from IIT Bombay. So she helps me with whatever data culling I require, whatever overlaying of data I require. And I think there was a question about taking graduate students. So, this is the job where people assist us with doing all those things. So I think I'll just stop here because we've gone over time. But I hope, Alok, if I've answered your question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mitali. I think since due to paucity of time, we'll not be able to take all the audience questions, but I'm sure that in some of the discussions we have touched upon all these questions. Despite being a work day, a lot of you have attended this, and I'm so grateful for all of our wonderful panelists for taking out the time and sharing their work and their case studies with us. This was very useful for us, and we believe all the audience got something from this session. I request all of you to check out our social media page. pages. EvalYouth India is a forum for young professionals and students to learn more about monitoring and evaluation. We conduct various webinars and capacity building program and sessions like this time to time. We have presence across almost all states, and request all of you to check our work. Thank you so much. I will request all of you to just switch on their videos for a minute. We'll take a group photo with the panel and close this session. Thank you so much, all of you. If possible, please switch on your video so that we can have a good memory of this event in form of a photo together. And thank you, Anshika, despite being of your health, you attended and shared your session with your speech with us. Great. Yatin, have we got the screenshot? With this,
Yes,
we are
yeah.
With this, we are at the end of this session. Again, thank all of you for attending. Please check out our page. We have shared the registration links, and hopefully see you in next training sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Kalyan, if
Thank
you
you.
have 5 minutes, will you stay back?
Sure.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you, and Kalyan, sorry, due to the paucity of time, मुझे आपको बीच में ही रोकना पड़ा. Doing the work of a moderator.
Yeah, that was perfect. Actually, I took more time and what was allocated to me.
I think we got some time from Anshika, but I think what you got, the points you shared were very important and useful, and that actually triggered a lot of discussion with Mithali and all. So thanks to you and Anshika. And Anshika, thank you so much. We really appreciate your presence. Despite being sick, you attended.
Thank you so much. I hope I just didn't mess it up or anything.
No, it was very well done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Are you doing more events like this, or how is it planned this year?